There are mornings that don't announce themselves. No alarm, no ceremony. Just light pressing through curtains the way it does when the world hasn't decided yet what kind of day it wants to be. That's how it started. Not with a press release. Not with a calendar reminder. Just a woman standing at a window, looking out at trees. I was there because I almost wasn't. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I'd been covering royal engagements for a small digital outlet for going on 6 years, and in 6 years you develop a finely tuned radar for what's genuine and what's choreographed down to the angle of a handshake. You learn to read the 15-minute arrivals, the prepared smiles, the way certain public figures hold their bodies like they're bracing for a photograph. It becomes second nature. Almost cynical, if I'm honest. So when the advisory came through on a Tuesday evening, informal, barely 3 sentences, stating that the Princess of Wales would be taking a morning walk in a woodland area outside Windsor as part of her ongoing mental health awareness work, I almost didn't go. Informal. That word usually means no cameras, reduced press pool, controlled access. It usually means you stand 40 feet away behind a rope and watch something that looks personal but has been workshopped by 3 communications teams. My editor sent me anyway. Just be there, she said. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones that matter. She was right. She usually is, and I usually don't tell her that. The morning was the kind of cold that doesn't feel aggressive. October in the English countryside does this, it gets under your coat without asking, settles in your joints, and somehow you don't mind. The sky was that particular flat white that photographers hate and I've always loved. No harsh shadows. Everything softened. The world looking a little like an old photograph of itself. I arrived at the designated meeting point, a small car park at the edge of Bigshot Oak Wood, at 7:10. There were perhaps 12 other people there, a handful of press, 2 photographers, some representatives from the mental health charity that had partnered with the princess on the initiative. Everyone was standing around in that particular British way of enduring cold, hands wrapped around takeaway cups, not quite making eye contact. A woman beside me, 50s, sensible boots, lanyard identifying her as a charity liaison, glanced at the treeline. She's already in there, she said. I turned. Sorry? She arrived early. Went in with just her protection officer. The woman smiled at her coffee. She does that sometimes. Gets ahead of the schedule so there's a bit of time that's just hers. I didn't write that down immediately. I should have. Instead I just stood there thinking about it, this idea of carving out minutes that belong only to you, even when your minutes technically belong to a country. We were walked in at 7:30 by a quietly efficient aide who introduced herself as Gemma and immediately made clear she was not there to answer questions. The path was proper woodland, not the manicured kind, not a park with iron benches and helpful signs about local wildlife. Real woodland. Roots lifting the ground in unpredictable places. Mud in patches that hadn't dried since September. Leaves down in their millions, rust and gold and a brown so dark it was nearly black, layered like something geological underfoot. It smelled of it. That deep, wet, composting smell that isn't pleasant exactly but is undeniably alive. The photographers around me were already doing the mental arithmetic of light and canopy gaps. One of them, a man I recognized from a dozen previous engagements, Jamie, jacket perpetually too thin for the weather, was muttering something about diffusion and shadow direction. Normal morning. Standard calculations. Then, we came around a long bend in the path, where the trees thinned slightly and opened into a small clearing, and there she was. I want to be careful here because I know how this reads. Every account of a moment like this risks tipping into reverence or performance, and I'm not interested in either. What I am interested in is accuracy. So I'll just tell you what I saw. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, not quite in it. One hand resting lightly on the bark of an oak tree the way you might rest a hand on a friend's shoulder without thinking, the gesture so small and natural it almost didn't register. She was wearing a wax jacket, dark olive, the kind that looks like it's been worn before. Walking boots that had actual mud on them, not fresh from the box mud. Real mud, with history. Her hair was loose under a wool hat, the kind that goes all the way down over the ears, and she was looking up at the canopy where the last of the autumn leaves were moving in a wind you could barely feel down on the ground. She was just looking. Not for a camera. Not at a camera. Just up, into the branches, the way anyone does when they're trying to locate something they heard but can't quite see. A protection officer stood 15 feet away, facing outward, utterly still in the manner of people trained to become furniture when the moment calls for it. She hadn't noticed us arrive yet. Gemma touched my arm and said, quietly, "Just a minute." I've thought about that minute a lot since. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with visibility, and I don't mean that as a critique of privilege, so stay with me. I mean that when every public appearance is documented, when your body in space becomes a record, when the simple act of buying flowers or walking to a car is the kind of thing that gets parsed and analyzed and headlined, there must be a specific hunger for moments that don't mean anything. Moments that are just weather and trees and the sound of a wood pigeon doing its low, repetitive, utterly unimpressed thing somewhere in the middle distance. That's what the minute looked like, to me. A woman having a moment that didn't mean anything. And finding, in the not meaning of it, something that meant everything. Then, Gemma stepped forward and the moment shifted. The princess turned, and the transition was so smooth it might have frightened me if I'd been watching for artifice. It wasn't the putting on of a face. It was more like returning. The way you come back from somewhere in your own head when someone calls your name in a quiet room. The present reassembling itself. She smiled. Not the formal version. Something more tired than that, and more real for being tired. "Sorry," she said, to no one specifically. I went ahead a bit. One of the photographers raised a camera instinctively and she glanced at it, not unkindly, and said, "Give me 5 minutes first? I'd love to just walk a little with everyone before we do anything formal." The photographer lowered the camera. Gemma made a note of something. And we walked. The thing about walking with someone really walking, not standing for photos or moving between rooms at a function, is that it changes the geometry of conversation. Side by side, looking forward, the words come differently. Less performed. Something about motion loosens things up. The body is busy and, so the social machinery relaxes slightly. She walked with the charity representatives first, which made sense and was, I understood, the point. 2 of them were young women, early 20s, who'd been part of a program the charity ran for adolescents struggling with anxiety and depression. One of them, I'll call her Mia, because she asked not to be named and, I'm going to respect that, had the slightly brittle quality of someone who has only recently stopped being afraid all the time. Still alert. Still watching the exits. But, walking. I stayed back, which is my instinct in these moments. Get close enough to observe. Not close enough to intrude. What I could hear was not remarkable in the way that things on the record are remarkable. There was no great speech. No eloquent statement about the importance of green spaces for mental recovery, though that came later, and I'll get to it. What I heard, mostly, was, "How long have you been coming to this program? Is it helping, do you think? What's helping most? I used to hate walks when I was younger. I thought they were boring. Someone made me go once and I was absolutely furious about it." Mia laughed at that. A real one, small and startled. "What changed your mind?" she asked. The princess thought about it. Actually thought about it, that pause you can always distinguish from the pause that's just politeness. "I think I got tired," she said. Tired of being inside my own head. Outside made it smaller somehow. The noise in here, a brief gesture toward her own temple, gets harder to hear when everything else is so much louder. Mia said, "Yeah. Just that. Yeah." And, somehow that single syllable, in that wet October clearing, held more of what the morning was about than any press release could have engineered. We walked for an hour. The path wound deeper into the wood and back out again in a long loop, the kind designed to feel like a journey when it's actually just a circle. Which is fine. Most of the journeys that matter are circles. At one point the path dipped and there was a puddle the size of a small pond, the kind that forms in the hollows of old woodland paths and doesn't drain because the clay underneath doesn't let it. The two younger women stopped at the edge of it. Calculated it. One of them, not Mia, the other one, braver, just went through it, boots disappearing into water that came up over the ankle line, and let out a sound that was half shriek and half laugh. The princess did not hesitate. She went through it too. Came off the other side with wet boots and an expression of mild triumph. That's approximately what my therapist looks like when we get somewhere difficult, she said, looking back at the puddle. Then, she walked on. No one was quite sure if that was a joke or not. I think it was both. Halfway through the walk, it rained. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that makes a good story. The English drizzle, the stuff so fine it's more attitude than weather, the kind that doesn't fall so much as arrive, settling on eyelashes and coat shoulders in a way that makes you feel like the sky is personally disappointed in you. Most of the press group pulled out their hoods. The princess did not. She tilted her head back slightly, just a degree or two, and I watched her blink against it, the same way you blink against sun, and, for a moment she looked about 12 years old and absolutely fine with being rained on. That was the first photograph that actually meant something. Janie got it. I saw the camera come up and I heard the click, quiet in the wet air, and I knew the way you know sometimes that he'd got it right. Not the formal portrait. Not the posed smile. Just a face turned upward into whether it didn't need to be turned into. Something unguarded. Something that looked, specifically, like relief. I'd been thinking about what mental health advocacy looks like when it's done well. Because it can be done badly. God, it can be done badly. The laminated poster in the staff room. The corporate email on World Mental Health Day telling you that it's okay not to be okay, sent by the same management structure that cut the department's budget and left 3 people doing 6 people's work. The celebrity who announces they have anxiety and, then, sells you a supplement. The instinct to be cynical about it is not unfounded. What I was watching, though, was something different in texture. And I want to try to describe the difference without being precious about it, because the difference matters. The difference was that nothing was being resolved. That's the thing about mental health content, usually, it wants to arc. It wants to move from darkness to light, struggle to break through, walk in the woods to feeling significantly better about yourself and the world. It wants the endorsement. The before and after. The face that has been healed by nature and a partnership with a reputable charity. This walk didn't do that. The walk just walked. Mia said, at one point, in that particular voice young people use when they're testing whether it's safe to say something true, "Some days I still can't get out of bed." Like, even now. Even when things are better. Nobody rushed to fix that sentence. Nobody said, "But, you're here today," or, "That's okay, progress isn't linear." All the things that are technically true and functionally useless. There was a beat of just letting it be true. Then, yeah. That still happens for me too, actually. A beat. What gets you up on those days? My kids, Mia said. Then, Riley, and sometimes the fact that I really need to wee. The laugh that came after that, from both of them, was the kind that startles itself. The kind with a little shock in it. Because something honest had been funny, and the funniness of it was part of the honesty, not a denial of it. There's a bench, deep in big-shot oak wood, that I later found out was placed there by a local conservation trust about 3 years ago. Simple oak timber, nothing inscribed on it, facing a break in the trees where on a clear day you can see across a shallow valley to the next ridge of woodland. That morning, with the drizzle and the flat white sky, the view was mostly gray, shapes dissolving into other shapes at the edges. The princess sat on the bench. Just sat. Not for a photograph. Gemma was talking quietly into a phone 20 feet away. The photographers had drifted slightly, doing what photographers do when there's nothing to shoot, the semi-purposeful wandering, the lens checking, the looking at things through rectangles. The other charity representative, I'll call her Priya, sat on the other end of the bench without being invited. The kind of thing you do when something in the air makes it possible. For a moment they both just looked at the gray view. Then, Priya said, my mom doesn't really get it. The mental health stuff. She thinks you just need to get on with it. Mine was similar, the princess said. Different generation. Different vocabulary for it. Did she ever come round? She's getting there. A pause. It takes longer for some people. But, I think what helps is showing rather than explaining. You can't convince someone that this stuff matters with an argument. But, if they see you get better, or see you manage something hard, sometimes that lands where words don't. Priya nodded slowly. My mom came to one of the sessions, she said. The family day. She cried. Did she say anything? She said she wished someone had given her this when she was my age. Priya was quiet for a moment. Which kind of broke my heart a bit. The princess looked at her. That's not a small thing, she said. That she said that. No, Priya agreed. It wasn't. I've covered enough public life to know when I'm witnessing something that will be remembered and, when I'm witnessing something that will matter. They are not always the same thing. What will be remembered from this morning is probably the photograph Jamie took, the face tilted into the rain. It'll run in the weekend supplements. It'll be used in the charity's annual report. It'll be shared on social media by people who'll write things like this is what real advocacy looks like alongside it, and they'll be right, but only approximately right, the way a photograph is only approximately a place. What will matter, what already matters, in the way that small true things matter, is what happened on that bench. Two women on a piece of oak timber, looking at gray trees. One of them carrying the weight of a public life so scrutinized it has required, I suspect, significant internal architecture to survive. The other carrying the weight of a young life interrupted by something she didn't choose. Neither of them fixing the other. Both of them just present. In the cold and the drizzle, in the actual specific irreducible fact of this particular morning. That's not nothing. That, I think, is everything. After the bench, the walk shifted. We emerged from the deeper part of the wood into a section where the path widened and the canopy opened up, the sky coming back in. Someone from the charity had arranged, at a small wooden shelter further along, a flask of tea and some biscuits. The kind of biscuits that are never quite right, slightly stale around the edges in a way that is somehow quintessentially English and, therefore, fine. The mood changed the way moods change after something real happens, lighter but, not falsely so, the way a room feels after a window's been opened. There was more laughter. Easier movement. The two photographers who'd been hovering with professional patience started getting the kind of shots that would have been impossible earlier, relaxed ones, unposed ones, the princess mid-gesture in a conversation, mud on her boots, hair going in the wrong direction from the drizzle. Someone, one of the charity staff, a man named Howard who had the energy of someone who'd been eating biscuits with important people his entire career and, found it nourishing, attempted a joke about the weather that landed badly and, then, somehow, in the recovery from it, landed perfectly. The princess laughed properly at the recovery. The kind where you have to put your tea down. Howard, she said, shaking her head. Every time, Howard said, satisfied. I asked my question during the tea break. I'd been granted 5 minutes. Gemma had communicated this to me with the careful clarity of someone who means exactly 5 minutes. I'd thought hard about what to ask. Not because the question mattered to my article, necessarily, but because I only had one and I didn't want to waste it on something that had already been answered on the record 17 times. So I asked the one thing I'd actually been thinking about all morning. Do you think it works? I said. Walking. Nature. The actual doing of it, do you think it genuinely helps, or is it the story we tell about it that helps? She looked at me for a moment. The look of someone deciding whether the question deserves a real answer or a polished one. She gave me the real one. I think, she said slowly, that it works for the same reason it's hard to explain. Because your body is involved. When you're struggling, when it's all up here, again, that gesture toward her own head, the body gets left behind somehow. It becomes just the thing carrying your brain around. And, when you walk, when you're outside, you're using your legs and your lungs and your skin and your senses, and your brain has to share the space with all of that. It has to renegotiate its lease, I suppose. She smiled at the phrase, a little surprised by it herself. So I do think it works. I think the story we tell about it helps too. I don't think those are separate things. But, the physical part, the actual being here, in mud, in this specific cold, I think that's real in a way that's hard to replicate. I wrote that down. Every word. Does it work for you? I asked, knowing I was almost certainly out of time. She didn't answer immediately. On good days, she said. On the other kind, it at least gets me out of my head for long enough to remember the good days exist. The formal part lasted 20 minutes. That's the thing people don't understand about these engagements, the ratio. An hour and 40 minutes of actual human contact and presence and muddy boots and real conversation, and then 20 minutes of standing in the right place and saying the right things while someone points a camera, and the whole event crystallizes into a version of itself that will live on the internet forever, slightly smaller and more resolved than the real thing was. The formal address happened back at the shelter. Someone had set up a small lectern, barely deserves the word, really, just a wooden board on a stand, and arranged a modest semicircle of people, the charity representatives and the two young women and a few others who'd arrived later that I hadn't seen on the walk. There was a banner. Tasteful, not enormous, featuring the charity's logo and the words Mind in Nature, a conversation about mental health. The princess stood at the lectern and spoke for about 8 minutes. I've read the official transcript since it's on the charity's website, properly formatted, with the pauses ironed out and the grammar cleaned up, and it's good. It's actually good. It talks about the importance of accessible green spaces, about the disproportionate impact of urban environments on mental health in low-income communities, about evidence-based approaches to nature therapy that aren't just about nice mornings in the woods for people who can afford to have them. It makes a specific argument, which is rare in this kind of address. It says, in language that manages to be plain without being simplistic, that mental health policy in the UK has historically treated the outdoors as a nice bonus rather than a genuine clinical tool, and that changing that requires not just awareness raising but resource allocation. Real money. Real access. Specifically for people who don't have gardens, who live in tower blocks, who take 3 buses to get to the nearest park and can't afford to take a morning off work to walk in woodland. I'm not going to quote it at length, the transcript is there if you want it. What I'll tell you is that the quality of the speech was noticeably different from the stuff produced by a PR department. It had thought in it. Actual engagement with the subject, the kind that comes from reading things and sitting with them rather than being briefed on them 40 minutes before an event. Mia, standing to the left of the lectern, cried a little during it. Not dramatically. Just the kind of tears that arrive when someone says something you've needed someone credible to say for a long time. I noticed, and then I looked away, because some things aren't for the record. After the formal address, there was a smaller moment that I keep coming back to. The photographers were doing their last setups, the arranged portraits, the handshake with the charity's director, the safe and usable images that everyone needed. The 2 young women were waiting slightly to the side, that specific quality of waiting that means you know you're about to leave somewhere and you're not entirely ready to. Mia had a phone in her hands. Turning it over and over the way people do when they want to ask something and haven't decided if they're going to. She walked over. I was close enough to hear this. I want to be clear that I wasn't trying to be. The shelter was small, the group had compacted, there was nowhere to be that wasn't close. Would it be all right if I took a photo? Mia asked. Just for me. My mom won't believe me otherwise. There was a brief, quiet flicker of negotiation between Gemma and the protection officer, eyebrows, the faintest tilt of a head. The kind of communication that happens in fractions of seconds in these situations. Of course, the princess said. They stood together while Priya took the photo with an unsteady hand, the phone tilted, the composition all wrong, a branch photobombing from the left. Mia looked at it and winced slightly. It's wonky, she said. All the best ones are, the princess said. There was a moment, after the formal photographs and before the departure, that gray zone of an event unwinding, people beginning to check phones and gather coats and drift toward the car park, when I found myself standing near the tree line again, roughly where we'd first come around the bend and seen her. The clearing looked different now. Busier, more trampled. The mud around the shelter thoroughly churned. The quiet had been replaced by the particular audio texture of a small event dissolving conversations, zipped bags, a radio crackling from the direction of the security vehicles. I looked at the oak tree where she'd been standing when we arrived. Her handprint wasn't there, of course. Bark doesn't hold impressions. But I kept looking at it anyway, the way you look at a place where something happened when you know the something is already over and you're just cataloging it. A flock of fieldfares came through the canopy then. That sound, if you know fieldfares, is immediately distinctive. A kind of chuckling, dry rattle, many voices at once. They came through fast and were gone in under 10 seconds, and, for those 10 seconds every conversation in the clearing stopped. Everyone looked up. That involuntary collective look, necks craned, mouths slightly open, the absolutely universal human response to birds suddenly filling the air above you. I glanced over at her, just to see. She was looking up with everyone else. Same expression. Same slight parting of the lips, same arrested attention. Just a person looking at birds. Just for that. The drive back was the usual kind of post-engagement flatness. Jamie sat in the passenger seat with his camera on his knee, cycling through the morning's frames on the small rear screen, the tiny images strobing past. At one point he stopped. Held the camera up so I could see it from the driver's seat without me having to take my eyes off the road for more than a second. The rain photograph. The face turned upward. Yeah, I said. Yeah, he said. We didn't talk about it more than that. Sometimes you don't need to. I've been doing this long enough to have become, without entirely meaning to, quite good at reading the difference between things that are performed and things that are felt. It's not a special skill. It's just repetition. You see enough public faces and you start to understand the microgrammar of them, the smile that reaches the eyes, the one that merely visits the vicinity of them. The pause that's processing and the pause that's selecting. The laugh that gets away from someone and the one that arrives on schedule. What I saw that morning in Big Shot Oakwood was a woman who has, by any measure, had a hard few years. Who has navigated illness and recovery and the specific peculiar cruelty of navigating those things in public, in a photographic record, under a scrutiny that would reduce most people to something unrecognizable. Who came out, on a drizzly October morning, to walk in mud with two young women who were struggling. And did not perform struggling being okay. Did not perform nature being healing. Did not perform anything, as far as I could tell. Just walked. Got her boots wet. Talked about not being able to get out of bed on bad days. Laughed at a bad joke that turned into a good one. Held her face up to rain she didn't have to stand in. There's a version of this story that's a profile piece with a pull quote and a sidebar about the charity's funding model. I'll write that version too. It's a perfectly good version and it'll do some useful work in the world. But this version, this one where I'm just trying to tell you what it was actually like to be there, this one I needed to write first. Because the thing about the quiet ones is, they're the ones that stay. Mia sent a message through the charity's communications team the following week. She asked if I'd be willing to share the article once it was published because she wanted to send it to her mom. I wrote back and said yes. Then, I wrote back again and said, the photograph of you both came out beautifully, by the way. Even with the branch. She wrote, especially with the branch. 3 weeks after the walk, I went back. I don't entirely know why. The article had been published by then, the proper one, the profile piece, the one with the pull quote and the photograph of the face turned up into the drizzle that had, as predicted, circulated widely and been used by the charity in their winter fundraising campaign. My editor was pleased. The engagement numbers were good. The piece had done the work it was supposed to do. But I found myself on a Thursday morning, with nothing specific scheduled, taking the turnoff for Big Shot Oakwood. The car park was empty. A different kind of silence from when we'd stood there in our coats with our coffees, waiting. This was the ordinary silence of a place that had gone back to being itself. I walked the same path. October had moved further into itself by then. The leaves that had still been on the trees 3 weeks ago were mostly down now, the canopy stripped back so you could see the structure of the branches, all that architecture that the leaves keep secret all summer and, then, reveal, unhurriedly, as autumn does its particular work. Spare. Clear-lined. A different kind of beautiful than the full-leaf version, less obvious, requiring a little more willingness from the person looking. The mud was worse. Proper winter mud, the kind that has committed to being mud and has no plans to change. I didn't mind. The clearing where she'd stood at the oak tree looked, as I'd known it would, like just a clearing. There was no residue of significance. The ground didn't know. The tree didn't know. The space had absorbed the morning and moved on, the way spaces do, the way they must, because they don't have the option of memory. I sat on the ground, the cold, damp, not quite inviting ground, with my back against that oak, the same one, and looked at the space. I thought about the conversation on the bench. Priya's voice saying she wished someone had given her this when she was my age. The specific way that landed. The way grief and progress can exist in the same sentence without either one canceling the other out. I thought about the fieldfares. I thought about the face in the rain. I thought about what it means to be someone whose bad days are somebody else's news cycle, whose recovery is somebody else's content, whose face in an unguarded moment gets turned into a charity banner and a positive engagement metric and a thumbnail on somebody's phone. What it costs to let that happen willingly, out of a conviction that the visibility might do some good. What it gives, too. I won't pretend the calculation is only debt. But what it costs. I've never been someone who spends a lot of time thinking about public figures as people. Occupational hazard, or occupational defense, you learn to hold them at a certain distance, to see them as subjects, to produce copy about them without the kind of proximity that makes the copy unreliable. That morning, though. That morning had got under my coat without asking. And, sitting against that oak tree in the cold, 3 weeks later, I found I was still thinking about it in the way you think about things that have changed something small but permanent in you. The way a conversation with a stranger on a train sometimes rearranges something. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you'd headline. Just a small correction in the angle of how you see things. I'd been covering 6 years of public life and I'd got, without realizing it, good at keeping my distance from the humanity of it. The walk in the mud had not let me keep my distance. I was annoyed about it, briefly. Then, I decided not to be. The bench was still there, of course. Oak timber. No inscription. Facing the valley that had been gray and dissolved when we'd sat there in the drizzle and was now, with the stripped canopy and a cold afternoon light that was thin but definite, actually showing you the ridge on the other side. The shape of the land. What had been invisible was now clear. I sat on it for a while. There's something slightly absurd about a journalist sitting on a bench in an empty wood in November having what amounts to a feeling. I was aware of the absurdity. I sat there anyway. Here is what I've come to think about what I witnessed. Mental health advocacy, the kind that actually moves something rather than just moving metrics, works when it refuses to offer resolution. When it says, this is hard, this stays hard, the point is not to fix it but to keep company with it. To not let the difficulty be a thing you carry alone in a room. The walk did that. Not because of who was on it, though that matters, that's the leverage, the person whose presence makes other people feel that they are worth being present for. Not because of the trees or the mud or the nature therapy research about cortisol levels and green spaces, though all of that is real and matters. Because of something simpler. 2 young women who were struggling were seen. Not fixed. Not reassured with statistics. Not handed a leaflet. Seen. Walked beside. Laughed with over a puddle. Sat with on a bench while the gray view did its gray thing. Asked questions and, then, given the space to answer them honestly without the answers being managed. And, the person doing the seeing was herself, visibly, imperfectly, a person who has struggled. Not as a device. Not as a narrative hook. Just actually. That's the thing that doesn't fit in a press release. That's the thing that can't be communicated in a pull quote or a charity banner or a thumbnail of a face turned up into the rain. The thing that 3 weeks later is still sitting in me like a small, stubborn stone. I left the wood when the light started failing early, as it does in November, the afternoon closing up around you faster than you expect. The path back to the car park was murkier than I'd thought. I went wrong once at a fork, took 30 seconds to figure it out, corrected. At the edge of the car park, just before the trees gave way to asphalt, I stopped and looked back. The wood was already dark between the trunks, the shapes resolving into outlines, the outlines dissolving into dark. A robin was singing somewhere, that winter robin singing, not the summer sound, something thinner and more insistent, a little bleak, a little brave. I stood and listened to it. It sang for a long time. Then, something in the undergrowth startled it and it was gone, and the wood went back to being quiet, and I went back to my car. The article that became this piece, the real one, not the profile, I didn't know I was going to write it when I drove home that day. I wrote it 6 weeks later, on a morning when I couldn't get out of bed. Not because I was ill. Just because some mornings the weight of ordinary life is, for no specific reason and, with no specific cause, heavier than the morning before. Those mornings that arrive without announcement and sit on your chest and dare you to identify what's wrong, knowing you can't, knowing there isn't a name for it that isn't. This is sometimes just what being a person is like. I lay there for a while. Then, I got up. I made coffee. I opened my laptop. And I started writing, and the thing I found myself writing was this, not the clean version, not the article with the pulled quote, but the actual account, the muddy one, the one with the bench and the fieldfares and the face in the rain and the two young women and the wonky photograph with the branch in it. I wrote it because writing is my woods. Everyone has something. The thing that gets them out of their own head long enough to remember the good days exist. The thing that makes the body share the space with the brain, forces a renegotiation of the lease. For some people it's walking. For some it's running, cooking, making things with their hands, being in water, being in noise, being in silence. The form doesn't matter. The function does. The function is getting out of your own head. Even briefly. Even imperfectly. Even on the mornings you don't want to. Especially on those mornings. I published it eventually. This version. The one you're reading now. My editor called it unusual. She meant it as a compliment. I'm choosing to take it as one. Because the usual version, the clean, professional, appropriately distanced version, is already out there doing its useful work. This one is for the mornings when it's harder. Wherever you are. Whatever your woods. Get out in them. Even if it's raining. Especially if it's raining.